The storm outside was so bad, a mother had no choice but to run into the nearest hotel with her little girl, just looking for shelter until it passed. Soaked from head to toe, freezing, she walked up to the front desk and asked for a room. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the manager said, looking her up and down. "This place isn't really for people like you." She blinked, confused. "Sir, please, my daughter is freezing. Just one room, that's all I'm asking." He didn't even look at the little girl shivering behind her. "We're full," he said flatly, even though rooms were sitting open right on his own booking app. "But it says here you have rooms available," she said, showing him her phone. "That's not accurate," he snapped. "You need to leave, now." Her daughter tugged at her sleeve, lips trembling. "Mommy, I'm so cold." The mother turned back to the manager, her voice breaking. "Please, sir, it's storming out there. She's just a child." "That's not my problem," he said. "Leave before I call security." With shaking hands, she stepped aside and dialed her husband's number, tears finally falling. What the manager did not know was that her husband was the owner of the very hotel he had just tried to throw her out of. And with one phone call she was about to make, he was going to find out exactly how much trouble he had just gotten himself into. Rain hit the windshield like small stones. Emma gripped the wheel with both hands. Her daughter, Sophie, was curled up in the back seat, hugging her stuffed bunny, eyes wide every time thunder cracked the sky. "Mommy, I'm cold," Sophie said. "I know, baby. We're almost there." The wipers could not keep up with the rain anymore. Emma slowed the car to a crawl. She could barely see 3 feet ahead. A tree branch had already fallen across the road 2 miles back, forcing her to turn around and take a longer route. Her hands were shaking, and it was not just from the cold. She saw the lights first. Tall, bright, glowing through the storm like a lighthouse. The Carter Grand Hotel. Her husband's hotel, one of dozens he owned across the country, though this one she had never visited. She pulled into the parking lot and let out a breath. "We made it," she whispered. She called Daniel before getting out. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you two okay? The news says that storm is bad." "We're fine, just soaked and tired. I didn't want to risk driving all the way home in this. There's a Carter hotel near me. I figured, surprise. We'll stay the night and see you tomorrow instead." She could hear the smile in his voice. "That's smart. Get somewhere warm. Take a hot bath. Order whatever Sophie wants from room service. I'll see you both soon." "Love you." "Love you too. Stay safe." Emma ended the call and turned to Sophie. "Okay, Munchkin, let's run." They stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked Sophie off her feet. Emma scooped her up and ran across the parking lot, holding her bag over both their heads, though it did almost nothing against the rain. By the time they reached the glass doors, they were both soaked to the skin. Sophie's teeth were chattering. The lobby was warm and gold and quiet. Marble floors, soft music, a few late-night guests sat near the fireplace. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Emma walked up to the front desk, dripping onto the polished floor, holding Sophie close to keep her warm. "Hi, I'd like a room for the night, please. Just one, for me and my daughter." The young receptionist Sarah smiled warmly. "Of course, I'll take this one." A man stepped in front of Sarah before she could type a single letter. He wore a sharp black suit, hair combed back, a gold name tag that read Victor Hayes, General Manager. He looked at Emma's soaked coat, her scuffed shoes, the cheap canvas bag on her shoulder. He looked at Sophie, shivering, clutching a stuffed bunny with a torn ear. His face changed, just slightly, like he had smelled something unpleasant. "I'm sorry," Victor said, his voice smooth and cold at the same time. "We're fully booked tonight." Emma blinked. "Oh, okay. Do you know if there's another hotel nearby that might—" "There isn't." That was all he said. No apology, no warmth, just a flat, final answer. Sophie tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm really cold." Emma looked back at the man. "Sir, I understand you're busy, but my daughter is soaked and freezing. Even a small room would help. We won't be any trouble." Victor's mouth curled into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. "I said we're full." Emma pulled out her phone and opened the booking app. Rooms were listed as available, right there on the screen. She turned it toward him. "It says right here that you have rooms open. Several, actually." For a moment, something flickered across Victor's face. Annoyance. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold calm. That system isn't always accurate, he said. Those rooms are being held for other guests. All of them? Yes. Emma glanced around the lobby. It was nearly empty. A couple sat by the fireplace, sipping wine. An elderly man read a newspaper near the elevator. That was it. This place doesn't look very full, she said quietly. Victor's jaw tightened. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear it. Ma'am, hotels like this one have a certain standard, a certain image we protect. I think you understand what I mean. There are other places more suited to your situation, a few blocks from here. Emma felt her face go hot. She understood exactly what he meant. He was not talking about the weather. He was not talking about rooms. He was talking about the way she looked, the way Sophie looked, cheap and wet and out of place in his glowing marble lobby. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice shaking now, but not from the cold. "I think it's best you find somewhere else," Victor said, louder this time, so a few guests near the fireplace glanced over. "This isn't the right place for people like you." Sophie looked up at her mother. "Mommy, why is he being mean?" Emma had no answer. She had never been spoken to like that in her life. Not once. She pulled Sophie closer and stepped back from the desk, her hands trembling. She walked a few feet away, turned her back to Victor, and called Daniel again. Her voice cracked the moment he answered. "Daniel? Emma, what's wrong? They won't give us a room. The manager, he basically told me I don't belong here. He said this place has a certain image, and I'm not it. Daniel, Sophie is freezing, and he won't even let us wait inside." There was a long pause. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had changed completely. It was flat, controlled, cold in a very different way than Victor's had been. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "Don't argue with him. Don't leave. I'm coming. Daniel, it's storming so bad outside. Please be careful." "I will. Just stay inside, Emma. Keep Sophie close." He hung up before she could say more. What Emma didn't know was that Daniel had already grabbed his coat and was heading for the door. And what she really didn't know was what happened in the next 90 seconds after her call ended. Victor walked over, arms folded, watching her put her phone away. "Are you finished with your call?" he asked, not even trying to hide his irritation now. "Because you and your daughter need to leave. This is private property, and I've asked you to go." "My husband is coming," Emma said. "Please, just let us wait by the door. We won't cause any trouble." "You've already caused trouble," Victor snapped, standing in my lobby, dripping on my floor, making my other guests uncomfortable. He turned to a security guard standing near the entrance and pointed at Emma and Sophie. "Get them out. Now. If they won't leave on their own, escort them." The guard hesitated, looking at Sophie's shivering little body. "Sir, it's storming pretty hard out there. Maybe we should just let them wait by the door until—" "Did I ask for your opinion?" Victor barked. "I said get them out, now, or you can find another job tomorrow." The guard's face fell. He stepped forward, slowly, reaching for Emma's arm. Sophie began to cry, gripping her bunny tight, backing away toward the glass doors where the storm howled outside. "Please," Emma begged, pulling Sophie behind her. "Just 5 minutes. My husband is almost here. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Victor's face twisted with something ugly, something that had been sitting under the surface the whole time. "I don't care who your husband is," he said, loud enough now that every guest in the lobby turned to look. "Get them out of my hotel, or I will call the police and have them removed for trespassing myself." He pulled his own phone from his pocket and began dialing, staring straight at Emma the entire time, daring her to move. Outside, headlights swung into the parking lot. Daniel had arrived faster than anyone expected. But inside the lobby, the guard's hand had already closed around Emma's arm. And Victor, phone pressed to his ear, was already telling the police that a woman and a child needed to be forcibly removed from Carter Grand Hotel property. He had no idea whose hotel it actually was. He was about to find out. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who thought they were better than you, this story is for you. Watch it to the end, because what happens to this man will make your day. Welcome back to the channel. Before we go on, just a quick favor. If you're enjoying the story, hit that subscribe button. You're about to watch a man throw away everything he had because of one little girl he thought didn't matter. The guard's fingers were still wrapped around Emma's arm when the doors opened, but it wasn't Daniel. Not yet. It was just the wind howling in for a second before someone shut it again. A false alarm. Emma's heart sank back into her chest. Victor was still on the phone, pacing a few steps away, voice sharp and confident. "Yes, officer," a woman and her child, refusing to leave hotel property after being asked. "I need someone here right away." He paused, listening. No injuries, not yet, anyway." He said the last part, looking directly at Emma like a warning. Sophie was crying now, the kind of crying that comes from a child who doesn't understand why the world suddenly turned mean. She buried her face in her mother's side, still gripping her bunny with both hands. "It's okay, baby," Emma whispered, though her voice shook too much to sound convincing. "Daddy's coming. Daddy's coming." Victor hung up the phone and slid it into his pocket, smoothing down his jacket like he'd just handled a minor inconvenience. 10 minutes, he announced to no one in particular. "Police will be here in 10 minutes. Sarah, the young receptionist, stood frozen behind the desk. She had watched the whole thing happen. The refusal, the lie about the system, the cruel comment about people like her. Every part of her wanted to speak up, but Victor had made it very clear with one sharp look in her direction that her job was on the line if she said a single word. She busied herself with papers she didn't need to touch, hands trembling. An older woman in a housekeeping uniform came around the corner pushing a small cart. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks had worked at the hotel for almost 11 years. She had seen difficult guests before, seen managers lose their patience, but she had never seen anything like this. A child, soaked and shaking, crying into her mother's coat while a grown man stood a few feet away, arms crossed, completely unbothered. Evelyn set down her cart and reached into it, pulling out a clean towel and a folded blanket meant for guest rooms. She walked toward Sophie. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said softly, kneeling down to wrap the blanket around the little girl's shoulders. "Let's get you warm." Sophie looked up at her with red, puffy eyes. For the first time since they'd walked into the lobby, someone had been kind to her. "Thank you," Emma whispered, tears finally spilling over. "What do you think you're doing?" Victor's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. He crossed the floor in a few quick steps and yanked the blanket right off Sophie's shoulders, tossing it back onto Evelyn's cart. Sophie gasped and grabbed for her mother again. "That blanket belongs to a paying guest," Victor snapped. "Not some family trying to force their way into rooms they can't afford." Evelyn stood up slowly, her face pale with disbelief. "Victor, she's a child. She's soaking wet. It's just a blanket." "It's hotel property, and she is not a guest here," Victor said. "Get back to work, Evelyn, before I write you up for insubordination." Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Sophie one more time, an apology in her eyes, and slowly wheeled her cart away. But she didn't go far. She stopped near the hallway, just out of Victor's sight, and watched. Emma had had enough. "Sir," she said, straightening her back, trying to keep her voice steady, "I don't understand what I've done to make you treat us this way. I asked for a room. That's it. I showed you rooms are available on your own app. My daughter is cold, and instead of helping us, you're taking a blanket off her shoulders and calling the police." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You want to talk about the app?" He turned to Sarah. "Close the reservation system, now." Sarah blinked. "Close it? Sir, we have guests checking in online, right?" "I said close it," Victor barked. "For the next hour, system maintenance." "Do it." Sarah's hands hovered over the keyboard. She glanced at Emma, then at Sophie, then back at her screen. Slowly, she typed in the command that would take the booking system offline. The little green available tags on the screen blinked out one by one. Emma watched it happen in real time on her own phone. The rooms that had been available seconds ago now showed a message, temporarily unavailable. Please try again later. She felt sick. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a man using his position to make sure she had no way to prove what was happening. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What did I ever do to you?" Victor stepped closer, close enough that Emma instinctively pulled Sophie behind her. "You didn't do anything to me," he said quietly, coldly. "This is business. This hotel has a reputation. People pay a lot of money to stay somewhere they feel comfortable, somewhere they don't have to look at." He gestured vaguely at Emma's wet clothes, her worn shoes, the scratched vinyl bag on her shoulder. I'm protecting my hotel, nothing personal. There is nothing wrong with how I look, Emma said, her voice shaking with anger now instead of fear. I got caught in a storm, that's all. That's all this is. And I've asked you, more than once, to leave, Victor said. You're trespassing. I called the police because you won't listen. My husband told me to stay right here. Your husband, Victor repeated, almost laughing. Lady, I don't care if your husband is the president. This is my hotel, and you're not welcome in it. He turned to the security guard still standing near them, the one who had hesitated earlier. Remove them. Now, physically, if you have to. The guard, a young man barely in his 20s, looked at Sophie's tear-streaked face, then at Emma, then back at Victor. Sir, she's got a kid. It's still storming pretty bad out there. Can we just... Do your job, Victor said, stepping right into the guard's space, or I'll find someone who will. I will personally make sure you never work security in this city again. Do you understand me? The guard's jaw tightened. He looked genuinely torn, but fear won. He reached for Emma's arm. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I need you to come with me. No, please, Emma said, pulling back, holding Sophie tight against her chest. Please, just wait a few more minutes. My husband is almost here. I promise, just... I don't have a few more minutes, Victor snapped. Get them out the front doors. 2 more staff members were called over. Emma tried to hold her ground, but with Sophie in her arms and 3 people now surrounding her, she had nowhere to go. The guard grabbed her elbow. Someone else reached for her bag, trying to guide her toward the exit. In the struggle, her handbag caught on the corner of the front desk and tore, the strap ripping clean off, spilling her wallet and Sophie's little toys across the marble floor. Sophie screamed. My bunny, she cried, reaching down as her stuffed animal slipped from her arms and landed near Victor's shoes. Victor looked down at the small stuffed rabbit lying at his feet. For a second, something almost human flickered across his face. Then it was gone. He kicked it aside. Open the front doors, he ordered. Get them out. An employee near the entrance hesitated, glancing outside at the storm still raging, rain slashing sideways against the glass, thunder rattling the windows. But Victor's glare left no room for argument. The doors were unlocked. Wind and rain came screaming into the lobby. Emma held Sophie as tightly as she could, backing toward the open doors, tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter's bunny lying abandoned on the cold marble floor behind them. Sophie was sobbing, reaching one small arm back toward it. Please, Emma begged one last time, looking around the lobby at everyone watching, at Sarah frozen behind the desk, at Evelyn peeking around the corner, at the handful of guests who had turned to watch the scene unfold and said nothing. Somebody, please. Just 5 more minutes. No one moved. The guard's hand tightened on her arm, pulling her toward the storm. And then the doors burst open from the outside. Not from the wind this time. Red and blue lights flashed across the lobby walls, bouncing off the marble floor, the glass windows, the gold trim on the front desk. 2 police officers stepped through the entrance first, rain dripping off their jackets, eyes scanning the scene, a crying child, a woman being pulled toward the exit, a man in a suit standing with his arms crossed like he owned the place. Victor straightened up immediately, smoothing his jacket, already forming the words he planned to say. Officers, thank you for coming. This woman refused to, but the words never left his mouth. Because right behind the officers, stepping through the same doors, soaked from the rain, jaw tight, eyes locked on his wife and daughter, was Daniel Carter. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at Victor. He walked straight past everyone in the lobby, past the frozen guests, past Sarah, past the officers, and knelt down in front of his daughter, who was still reaching one small hand toward her bunny on the floor. Every single person in that lobby went silent. Victor's confident smile slowly began to fade, replaced by something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like fear. He had called the police on a woman and her child. He had no idea he had just called them on himself. Daniel picked up the small stuffed bunny from the floor first. He brushed it off gently with his sleeve, then handed it to Sophie before lifting her into his arms. She buried her face into his soaked shoulder, still crying, still shaking. I'm here, he said quietly, rubbing her back. I'm here now. You're safe. He turned to Emma next. pulling her close with his free arm. She was crying too, the kind of crying that comes out only after the danger has passed and the body finally lets go. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered against her hair. "I'm so sorry it took me this long." "You came?" Emma said. "That's all that matters." For a moment, Daniel just held them both, right there in the middle of the lobby, rain still dripping from his coat onto the marble floor. The two police officers stood a few feet back, waiting, watching the room. Victor still hadn't said a word. He stood near the front desk, arms no longer crossed, his confident posture from a minute ago completely gone. He was trying to piece together what was happening. A hotel owner, kneeling on the floor of his lobby, holding a soaked child like she was the most important thing in the world. Then the elevator doors opened. Two senior executives, the regional director and the head of hotel operations, came rushing out, straightening their jackets, clearly having been called down in a hurry. "Mr. Carter," the regional director said, slightly out of breath, "we came as soon as we heard you were on the property. Is everything all right?" The words hit the lobby like a bomb. "Mr. Carter." Victor's face went white. He looked at Daniel again, really looked this time. The wet coat, the exhausted eyes, the way every staff member in the room had suddenly gone stiff and formal the moment he walked in. This wasn't just some angry husband coming to complain. This was the owner, the founder of Carter Grand Hotels, the man whose name was on every plaque, every contract, every paycheck in the building. The man Victor had personally been trying to keep out of his own hotel for the last hour without ever knowing it. "Sir?" Victor started, his voice suddenly much softer than it had been minutes ago. "I didn't realize. There's been a small misunderstanding tonight, and I was just trying to." "Not yet," Daniel said, standing up slowly with Sophie still in his arms. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I want to hear everything first, from everyone, before anyone says another word to defend themselves." He looked around the lobby. "Everyone who was here tonight, stay exactly where you are." No one moved. Daniel handed Sophie gently to one of the officer's partners, a kind-faced woman who wrapped the girl in a dry blanket someone had finally brought over. Emma stayed close, wiping her eyes, watching her husband change in front of her. She had seen him calm before. She had seen him serious before, but she had never seen him like this. Quiet, still, controlled in a way that felt far more dangerous than shouting ever could. "Sarah?" Daniel said, turning to the young receptionist. "You were at the front desk when my wife arrived. Tell me exactly what happened. Everything. Don't leave anything out." Sarah's hands were still shaking. She glanced at Victor, then back at Daniel. "Sir, She swallowed hard. "I was going to check them in. There were rooms available, plenty of them, but Mr. Hayes stepped in front of me before I could finish. He told me not to book them. He said the hotel was full, but it wasn't. He made me close the reservation system so she couldn't book online either." Victor's jaw tightened. "Sarah, that's not." "Let her finish," Daniel said without even looking at him. Sarah took a breath. "He told her this wasn't the right place for people like her, in front of everyone. And when she wouldn't leave because you told her to wait, he ordered security to remove her. He grabbed the blanket off her daughter." Daniel's eyes moved to Mrs. Evelyn, who was standing near the hallway, still holding her cart. "Is that true?" Evelyn stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, sir. I brought a blanket for the little girl because she was freezing. Mr. Hayes took it right off her shoulders and told me to get back to work. Said the blanket belonged to a paying guest." Sophie, wrapped in the officer's blanket, spoke up in a small voice from across the room. "He kicked my bunny," she said. The lobby went completely silent. Daniel's jaw flexed just slightly. It was the first real crack in his calm. He turned to the young security guard who was staring at the floor, looking like he wanted to disappear. "You," Daniel said. "What did he tell you to do?" The guard swallowed hard. "He told me to physically remove them, sir. Said if I didn't, he'd make sure I never worked security in this city again. I tried to talk him out of it because of the storm and because of the kid, but he wouldn't listen." "And did you? Remove them?" The guard nodded slowly, ashamed. "I had her arm. We were walking toward the door when the police showed up." Daniel finally turned to Victor. "You called the police on my wife and daughter." It wasn't a question. Victor opened his mouth to explain, but Daniel wasn't finished. You closed a booking system to hide open rooms. You took a blanket off a 6-year-old child. You told my wife, to her face, that this hotel wasn't the right place for people like her. And then, when she wouldn't leave because I personally told her to stay, you had security drag her toward the door in a storm with our daughter screaming. Sir, I was protecting the image of the... Don't, Daniel said, his voice suddenly sharp enough to cut the sentence in half. Don't you dare tell me you were protecting my hotel. My hotel was built so people like my wife would never have to hear what you said to her tonight. One of the officers, David Collins, stepped forward. He had been quietly taking notes on a small pad, listening to every word. Mr. Hayes, Officer Collins said, when you called us, you reported that a woman and her child were refusing to leave the property and had become disruptive. Is that accurate? Victor hesitated. I may have described it a certain way to get a faster response. So you lied in your call to police. I didn't lie. You told dispatch there was a possibility of injury, Collins said, checking his notes. Is that true? Was anyone injured? Victor's eyes darted around the room. No, but... We also have a report, Collins continued, of an employee here saying you instructed staff to review and delete camera footage near the front entrance shortly before we arrived. Is that true? The color drained completely from Victor's face. Sarah's eyes went wide. She hadn't known about that part. I don't know what you're talking about, Victor said quickly, too quickly. An older man sitting near the fireplace, who had been quietly watching the entire scene while waiting for his car, finally spoke up. I saw him, the man said calmly. I was sitting right there the whole time. I saw him grab that camera near the desk and turn it away from the lobby about 10 minutes before you all showed up. I also recorded some of what happened on my own phone in case anyone needs it. He held up his phone. Officer Collins walked over and took a look at the footage. His expression hardened as he watched. He nodded to his partner, who pulled out a second tablet and began comparing it with the hotel's own security system, which the older executives had just unlocked for him. The footage matched. Victor grabbing Emma's arm, the blanket being torn away from Sophie, the front doors being pulled open into the storm, and near the end, Victor leaning toward a camera near the desk, turning it away from the room just minutes before the police arrived. Daniel watched all of it in silence, his hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder the entire time. When the video ended, nobody spoke for a long moment. Daniel finally broke the silence. Victor. Victor looked up, his whole body tense. You're finished here, effective immediately. You no longer work for Carter Grand Hotels, in any location, in any position. Sir, please, I have a family. You should have thought about families before you tried to throw a 6-year-old into a storm, Daniel said quietly. Officer Collins stepped forward, clipping his notepad shut. Victor Hayes, you're under arrest for assault, filing a false police report, and attempting to destroy evidence. You can't do this, Victor said, panic finally breaking through his composure. I run this hotel. I've worked here for years. This is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to... Turn around, please, Collins said, already reaching for his handcuffs. Victor's shoulders sagged. He turned around slowly, and the officer clicked the cuffs into place. The sound echoed through the silent lobby. As Collins led him toward the doors, past the front desk, past Sarah and Evelyn and the young security guard, past the same marble floor where Sophie's bunny had been kicked aside less than an hour earlier, nobody said a word. They just watched. The man who had spent the night deciding who deserved to be treated like a human being was walked out of his own lobby in handcuffs, past every person he had once ordered around, like they didn't matter. The doors closed behind him. The storm outside had finally started to calm. Daniel let out a slow breath and turned to Sarah. Thank you, he said. I know it wasn't easy to speak up. Most people wouldn't have. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't stop him. You told the truth when it counted, Daniel said. That's what matters. He turned to Mrs. Evelyn next. And you tried to help my daughter before you even knew who she was. That says everything about who you are. Evelyn wiped her eyes and nodded, too emotional to speak. Daniel walked back over to Emma and Sophie. He gently took his daughter's small hand, careful not to disturb the bunny she was clutching again with her other arm. Let's get you both somewhere warm, he said softly. Really warm this time. A few minutes later, hotel staff quietly escorted the family upstairs to the presidential suite, the best room in the entire building. A fire was lit. Warm towels and hot chocolate appeared almost instantly. Sophie was wrapped in a soft blanket, finally warm for the first time all night, her bunny tucked safely under her arm. For the first time since they had walked through those glass doors soaked and shivering, Sophie smiled. Daniel sat beside her, brushing her damp hair back from her face. "Better?" he asked. Sophie nodded, snuggling closer. "Much better, Daddy." Emma leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, watching their daughter finally relax. The worst night of their lives was over. But for Daniel, something else was just beginning. Because as he sat there holding his family close, he couldn't stop thinking about one simple, painful question. If this could happen to his own wife and daughter, in his own hotel, how many other families had been treated the exact same way, in silence, with no one ever finding out? If you're enjoying the story and felt that satisfaction watching Victor get handcuffed in his own lobby, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This story isn't over yet. Comment, "I see you, Sophie," if you enjoyed the justice for that little girl. 3 days after the storm, every general manager and regional director from every Carter Grand hotel in the country received the same message. Mandatory meeting, company headquarters. Thursday, 9 in the morning. Attendance is not optional. Nobody knew exactly why. Rumors had already started spreading about what happened that night, but no one had the full story. Some heard Victor Hayes was fired. Some heard he was arrested. A few didn't believe either version. By 9 o'clock, the largest conference room at Carter Grand headquarters was packed. Over 60 managers sat shoulder to shoulder, nervous energy filling the room. Daniel Carter rarely called meetings like this. He almost never appeared in person at all. At exactly 9, the doors opened and Daniel walked in. He looked tired. Older, somehow, than he had a week ago. He didn't sit. He stood at the front of the room, a single folder in his hand, and waited for the room to go completely silent before he spoke. 5 nights ago, he began, my wife and my 6-year-old daughter walked into one of my hotels during a storm, soaked, cold, scared. They asked for a room. He paused. They were refused, lied to, humiliated in front of strangers. My daughter had a blanket taken off her shoulders by a grown man because he decided she didn't look like she belonged in that lobby. When my wife wouldn't leave because I told her to stay, that same man had security drag her toward the door and threw her out into the storm. A few managers shifted in their seats. Nobody said a word. He also called the police and lied to them, claiming she was violent. He tried to delete the security footage that proved what he'd done. He is currently facing criminal charges. Daniel let that sit in the room for a moment. His name was Victor Hayes. Some of you knew him. He was good at his job by most measures. Profits were high at his property. Guest complaints were low. On paper, he looked like one of our best managers. He set the folder down on the table in front of him, but he judged people by how they looked before he ever gave them a chance to speak. And I have no idea how many other families walked into that same lobby over the years and were treated exactly the same way, quietly, without anyone ever finding out. He looked around the room slowly. That ends today. A woman near the back raised her hand slightly. "Mr. Carter, was it your family? We heard rumors, but nobody knew for sure." "It was," Daniel said simply. "My wife, my daughter." The room went completely still. A few managers exchanged glances. If it could happen to the founder's own family, without anyone stepping in until it was almost too late, what had been happening in hotels where nobody was watching at all? Daniel opened the folder and pulled out a short stack of papers, handing them to an assistant to begin distributing around the room. "Starting today, every property adopts what we're calling the Compassion First policy," he said. "It isn't complicated. Nobody, ever, is turned away without help during dangerous weather. Not a family, not a stranger, not someone who doesn't look like they belong. If a child, an elderly person, or anyone vulnerable shows up at our doors during a storm, they get a warm place to wait, a blanket, something hot to drink. No exceptions, no excuses," he continued. "Every front desk will keep a small stock of blankets and warm drinks specifically for situations like this. Every manager will be trained to solve problems first and judge people never. If I hear even one report of a guest being turned away because of how they looked, how they dressed, or what they could or couldn't afford, that manager is gone the same day. No warnings, no second chances. One of the regional directors near the front spoke up carefully. "Sir, with respect, some of these decisions, refusing certain guests, are judgment calls managers make every day. There are real safety concerns sometimes, difficult guests, unpaid bills. There's a difference between a real safety concern and personal prejudice," Daniel said, cutting him off, though his tone stayed calm. "My wife wasn't a safety concern. My daughter wasn't a safety concern. They were cold, tired, and asking for a room that was sitting empty. Victor decided in about 10 seconds that they didn't belong, based on nothing but the way they looked. That's not a judgment call. That's exactly what this policy is meant to stop." The room stayed quiet. Daniel's voice softened, just slightly. "I grew up watching my father get treated like that. He worked service jobs his whole life, and customers looked down on him constantly, like he was invisible, like he didn't deserve basic respect just because of what he did for a living. I built this company so that would never happen to anyone who walked through our doors. And I failed to see it happening under my own roof, to my own family, until it almost went too far." He looked around the room one final time. "I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to treat every single person who walks in those doors like they matter. Because they do. All of them." After the meeting, 2 names were called into Daniel's office individually. The first was Sarah. She walked in nervously, unsure why she'd been asked to fly out to headquarters. Daniel stood and shook her hand. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said. "You could have stayed quiet that night. A lot of people would have. Victor made it very clear what would happen if you didn't follow his orders." "I almost did stay quiet," Sarah admitted. "I was scared." "But you didn't," Daniel said. "You told the truth when it counted the most, in front of everyone, knowing it could cost you everything. That kind of honesty is rare. I want you to know it didn't go unnoticed." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a formal offer, a promotion to guest relations coordinator, a new position that would help train staff across the region on the new Compassion First policy, along with a significant raise. Sarah stared at it, stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Daniel said, smiling for the first time since the meeting began. "And keep speaking up. That's exactly the kind of person we need training everyone else." Later that afternoon, Mrs. Evelyn arrived, still in her housekeeping uniform, looking slightly out of place in the polished executive office. "Mrs. Brooks," Daniel said warmly, standing to greet her. "Please, sit." "Mr. Carter, if this is about the blanket, I want you to know I'd do it again," Evelyn said before he could speak. "I don't care what Victor said. I couldn't just watch that little girl freeze." "I know," Daniel said. "That's exactly why you're here." He explained the new role he wanted to create for her. Guest care supervisor, a position that would exist at every Carter Grand property. Someone responsible for watching out for guests who needed extra help, whether that meant families caught in storms, elderly travelers, or anyone who simply needed someone to notice them. "You saw my daughter needed help before anyone else did," Daniel said. "You didn't need a title or an order. You just saw a child in trouble and acted. That instinct is exactly what I want leading this program." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. 11 years of quietly doing her job, never asking for recognition, and in one single night, kindness had changed everything. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Daniel said. "You did the right thing when it was hard. That matters more than you know." That evening, back at home, Daniel sat on the couch with Sophie curled up beside him, her bunny resting in her lap, its ear freshly stitched back on by Emma the day before. "Daddy," Sophie asked, "is that mean man going to hurt anyone else?" Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "No, sweetheart. He's not going to be working at any hotel ever again, and I made sure something like that can't happen to another family, not the way it happened to us." Sophie thought about that for a moment, hugging her bunny a little tighter. "Good," she said simply. "Nobody should be cold." Daniel looked down at his daughter, a small, quiet smile crossing his face for the first time in days. "No," he agreed softly. "Nobody should." Winter came again. Almost 8 months after the storm that changed everything, another one rolled in, just as fierce, just as sudden. Rain turned to sleet, wind bent the trees outside the Carter Grand Hotel, and thunder rattled the same tall windows that once watched a mother and her daughter get thrown out into the dark. Inside, the lobby glowed warm and gold, same as always, but something about it felt different now. Softer, maybe, kinder. A car pulled into the parking lot just after 10 at night. A young couple stepped out, soaked within seconds, holding 2 small children close to their chests. The kids were crying, shivering, their little shoes squishing with every step across the flooded lot. The family looked exhausted, their clothes worn, their bags cheap and battered. Exactly the kind of family Victor Hayes once decided didn't belong in a place like this. They pushed through the front doors, dripping onto the marble floor, bracing themselves the way people brace for bad news. Nobody made them wait. A young staff member rushed forward before the family even reached the desk, arms already full of warm towels. Another employee appeared seconds later with a stack of blankets, kneeling down immediately to wrap the smallest child, a boy no older than 4, who was crying from the cold. "Let's get you warm, sweetheart," the employee said gently, tucking the blanket around his shoulders. The mother stood frozen for a second, stunned by the sudden kindness, like she had expected something very different to happen. "We don't have a reservation," she said quickly, almost apologetically. "We just needed somewhere safe until the storm passes. We can pay for a room if—" "Don't worry about any of that right now," Sarah said, stepping around the desk instead of staying behind it. She was the same young receptionist from that stormy night 8 months ago, but she carried herself differently now, calm, steady, sure of herself in a way she hadn't been before. "Let's just get you and your kids dry and warm first. We'll sort out the room in a minute." The mother's eyes welled up with tears, the kind that come from relief rather than sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. "Of course," Sarah said, smiling. "That's what we're here for." A few feet away, Mrs. Ding, Evelyn appeared with hot chocolate for both children, kneeling down to their level, her warm, familiar presence instantly calming them. She now wore a different name tag, one that read Guest Care Supervisor, but her heart hadn't changed one bit. "There we go," she said softly, wrapping her hands around the little girl's cold fingers along with the warm cup. "Better?" The little girl nodded shyly, managing a small smile. Within minutes, the family was settled into a room, warm, dry, safe, exactly like it should have been for another mother and daughter 8 months earlier. Up on the mezzanine level, overlooking the lobby, 3 people stood quietly watching the entire scene unfold. Daniel Carter, Emma, and Sophie, now 7 years old, had come to check on this particular property, one of many stops on a quiet visit Daniel liked to make from time to time, unannounced, just to see how things really worked when nobody expected the owner to walk in. Nobody in the lobby below recognized them. That was exactly how Daniel wanted it. Sophie leaned against the railing, watching the little boy below get wrapped in his blanket, watching him finally stop shivering, watching him smile up at the woman helping him. "Daddy," she said quietly, "that boy was cold, just like I was." Daniel knelt down beside her. "He was, but nobody was mean to him," Sophie said. "Nobody told him he didn't belong." "No," Daniel said, "nobody did." Sophie watched a little longer, resting her chin on her arms, still holding her bunny, its ear stitched carefully back in place months ago and never torn again. "Nobody's cold anymore," she said softly. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "That's exactly how it should be." Emma stood beside them, watching the family below finally relax, watching Sarah laugh gently with the mother, watching Evelyn make both children giggle despite the storm still raging outside. She thought back to that night, to the fear in her own chest, to the humiliation of being told she didn't belong somewhere simply because of how she looked after running through the rain. She had never told this story publicly. She never wanted attention or sympathy for it. But watching this family being treated with warmth and patience, watching the exact opposite of what happened to her play out in the very same lobby, felt like something had finally come full circle. "You did this," Emma said quietly, looking at her husband. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, Sarah did this. Evelyn did this. Every manager who sat in that meeting 8 months ago and actually listened, they did this. I just made the rule. They're the ones who chose to care. Down below, the young security guard from that stormy night, still working at the same property, walked past the family and paused just long enough to crouch down and make the little boy laugh with a silly face. He had been given a second chance after that night too, once Daniel learned how hard Victor had pressured him to act against his own judgment. He never hesitated to help a guest again. Victor Hayes, meanwhile, was somewhere far from any hotel lobby. His case had gone through the courts months ago. Assault, filing a false police report, attempting to destroy evidence. The judge hadn't been kind, especially after video of the incident, the one recorded by the older guest that night, had been shown in court, along with statements from Sarah, Evelyn, the young guard, and Officer Collins. Victor never worked in hospitality again. No hotel would touch his name after the story became public within the industry. Whatever pride he once carried, the same pride that made him believe he had the right to decide who deserved warmth and who didn't, was long gone now. Replaced by consequences he never saw coming that night, he confidently picked up his phone and called the police on a soaked, freezing mother and her child. He had wanted to protect an image. Instead, he lost everything trying to enforce it. Below in the lobby, the storm outside was finally beginning to calm. The young family, warm and dry now, sat together near the fireplace, the kind of quiet, safe moment Emma and Sophie never got to have that first terrible night. Sophie watched them a while longer, then turned to look up at her parents. "Can we come back here again sometime?" she asked. "I like seeing them be happy." Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I think that can be arranged." Daniel stood, lifting Sophie gently into his arms, even though she was getting a little too big for it, the same way he had lifted her that stormy night, wrapping her in his coat, carrying her away from a place that had tried to make her feel small. This time, there was no fear in her eyes, no tears, just a quiet, simple happiness, the kind that comes from watching kindness win. As they turned to leave the mezzanine, Daniel glanced back one last time at the lobby below, at Sarah tucking a spare blanket around the little boy's shoulders, at Evelyn refilling the family's hot chocolate without being asked, at strangers being treated exactly the way every guest, every person, deserved to be treated from the very beginning. It wasn't really about hotels anymore. Not to him. It never had been. It was about the moment someone walks through a door, soaked, tired, and afraid, not knowing if anyone on the other side will bother to care. And now, in every single one of his hotels, the answer would always be yes. The camera would pull back slowly here, leaving the warm lobby glowing behind them, the storm fading into the distance, a quiet, steady kind of ending. Not loud, not dramatic, just right. Because the real victory was never Victor's downfall. It was this: a little boy laughing by a fireplace, a mother finally able to breathe, a little girl who once felt small, now old enough to understand that one bad night, faced head-on, had helped build something good enough to outlast it. Nobody's cold anymore. That's exactly how it should be. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment and let me know your favorite moment from Emma and Sophie's journey. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story about people who turn their pain into power. See you in the next one.